It was like in 2005. I was on my way up to Aspen for the weekend when my doctor called me on my cell phone and told me that I was diabetic. And as soon as I got back to come on down, and he'd give me some metformin to protect my kidneys, he said. I said, oh, darn. You know, I was a little depressed because my mom died of diabetes. So I figured, you know, what the heck, I was the next one in line. So when I got back, I went and seen him, and he gave me metformin and tested my blood. And his nurse actually came out with a meter to give me. And he says, what are you doing that for? He doesn't need a meter, you know, which I thought was kind of odd, because if he had diagnosed me as diabetic, you know, I should be testing my blood. So before that, he had already put me on high blood pressure pills, you know, and I was taking those. And so then I started taking the metformin, taking it twice a day, and I didn't feel no different, you know, a little more sluggish. And then he said, I want you to go see this endocrinologist who was working with him. I think he was some relation to him. But anyway, he said, that endocrinologist said, I have this thing called Byetta, you know, where you had to inject it into your abdomen. It took me about 45 minutes to take that first one, you know. I don't like needles too well, especially when I'm doing it to myself. But he said I'd also lose weight with that stuff, you know. Well, I can see why, because it made me very nauseous, you know. And so I just put that stuff aside. And, you know, I just knew I was destined to go down the same path that my mother went down. You know, and that was actually the first time that I'd ever been told about diabetes. You know, I figured it was either coming from my pancreas, you know. I had no idea that it was caused by other organs or stuff, you know. And so then he asked me, you know, if I'd want to do the program, and I said, well, you know, I don't know. He said, well, what's your main concern? I said, main concern is that you're not selling me a bottle of snake oil, you know. I said, because if you are, that's going to tick me off, you know. Nobody's told me that you could reverse diabetes. Everybody told me that once I have it, you know. He said, well, you do your part and I'll guarantee my part. I said, fair enough. So I tried it, started feeling better. After about, I guess about 3 months, maybe 3.5 months, I just knocked everything off. Just quit taking it. Felt better. Really did. And I hinged on telling my doctor, you know. I went in for a checkup. He says, so what medications are you taking now? I said, nothing. He said, you're not taking your metformin? No. We better test you, he says. I said, test away, you know. So about 3 days later, the nurse called me, said, hey, everything's normal. I said, of course it is, you know. So that's when I knew that this program is working. On the program, you know, I would come in once a week, and I would sit down. They would tell me about, you know, they'd ask me how I was doing, what my numbers were on my meters. And quite surprisingly, they came down dramatically once I started knocking off all that junk. And each time that I'd come in, you know, it was the same thing, you know, how you feeling, you know, certain tests were run, and make sure that everything was working right, you know. And I tell you, it's my depression is gone. I'm no longer going to die with diabetes, you know. Uh, yeah, so, you know, it's just fantastic. To me, it's fantastic.